Many of you on this call have been with us for a long time on this journey. It goes all the way back to 2014, actually. But I think we've kind of hit a critical moment, a time at which we can really make some real progress over the coming year. So we wanted to fill you in on that, kind of what's happening, what lies ahead, and also to provide you with some opportunities to participate as well, as if you're so inclined. So let me begin actually by introducing Leslie Mullinex, who is our Pre-K Priority Project Coordinator. And she's going to share with you some of the things that have happened, especially over the last 6 to 7 months, when we really launched a campaign to move this initiative forward. So Leslie, if you'll go ahead and just share with us kind of the ground that we've covered over the last several months.
Sure, thanks, Bob. So before we jump into Fall 2020 campaign, as a recap, I just wanted to say it's so interesting that we're having this reconvening session today, and the timing and looking back at the same time last year. We had just begun a new phase of community engagement activities, and we had a series of library visits across the county that were planned to share information about the pre-K priority with families of young children. And we'd actually visited the Clemens branch and the downtown library the week before everything shut down because of the pandemic. And another opportunity that was in the works was our partnership with the Office of Civic Engagement at Wake Forest University. A senior student was completing her capstone project by helping us with canvassing efforts in conjunction with Neighbors for Better Neighborhoods. And all of these plans were cut short because of COVID-19. So like so many of you that work for organizations that do community work, we had to switch how we were doing our engagement. So over the summer, we regrouped, and with this first slide, you can see what we did in terms of our fall campaign that really switched to be more of a digital and virtual version. So our fall campaign started in September with monthly electronic newsletters to over about 1,500 subscribers. And they featured news stories and articles that were both local and national, and they were related to pre-K and childcare issues in particular. And they focused a lot on the webinar topics that we were going to be featuring, as well as some of the challenges that were specific to the pandemic. The summer of 2020 saw the United States' biggest protest around racial justice and civil rights that we had experienced in a generation. And it was actually instrumental in centering equity for the pre-K priority in our initiative at that time. So that led us in September to also publish the equity case statement and our report and our call to action around equity as a cornerstone for early childhood education and experiences for children. After that, we were moving into some of the print news that we were able to get an op-ed in the Winston-Salem Journal and the Chronicle back in September. That was co-authored by Bob and Louis Finney, that you'll hear from in a minute. He's our executive director of Smart Start here locally. And it highlighted the inequities in our pre-K landscape that had been further exacerbated by the pandemic. It also talked about the disparities in funding, and the part that really, I think, hit the mark at the end of that op-ed was they said, if we are serious about putting our children first, Forsyth County cannot be content to continue to come in last. Following that, the Winston-Salem Journal published an article in October that really highlighted that op-ed, and it called on our local leaders to form a community-wide task force to expand access to high quality. So a declaration of support quickly followed, and we highlighted that in all three newspapers in late October. In the Journal, the Chronicle, and KPASA, they all highlighted the 60 organizations that had signed on to our declaration of support, calling on the task force to be implemented. And we'll talk about that in a few more minutes and talk about how the organizations really help motivate our leaders. The webinar series, I'd love to give you a recap on all 4 webinars and highlight, we had so many esteemed guest panelists, but we don't have the time to recap that today. So I will just tell you a brief overview and invite you to go to our website, because we have all of those recordings on our website if you're interested and missed any of the webinars. But the first one, it was in September, and it was really just kind of a reorientation. Here's where we are, here's where we're going. Welcome back. And then an equity and pre-K webinar was the next one that we did in September. And it really focused on the disparities in pre-K. We had guest panelist Kelly Easton that you'll hear from today, as well as Ebenezer Mead. And they talked about the importance of embedding equity in our educational system and in the education of our teachers. Next, we moved on in November to pre-K quality and quantity. And that webinar really focused on the difference in how children operate when they get to school if they've had high quality pre-K. And it also talked about how Forsyth County receives so little state and local funding for pre-K in comparison to other counties that are our size. The next one we held was in December, and that was focused on childcare and the economy. And it was really talking about how the landscape had changed considerably. Coutura Jackson helped us understand that better. And then we also had Calvin McRae from Winston-Salem Inc., which is also Chamber of Commerce. And he talked about what a strong workforce means when you have high quality pre-K involved. So we rounded out that series of webinars also with a film screening of the documentary called Starting at Zero. And it featured a host of governors from across the nation. And one was our very own Jim Hunt, former Jim Hunt, who had established More at 4, which is now known as Smart Start. Those governors have made it a priority in their state to speak to how important it is to not only the adults, the children who become adults, but then also the local economy for early education initiatives. So all this led to the final piece of engaging our local officials. And we had a virtual legislative breakfast in November, and we invited all of our Forsyth County elected leaders to hear more about where we stood in the county rankings for NC pre-K and market rate subsidy reimbursements, as well as kind of, again, calling them to the table to partner with us and how to move this forward. Those Zoom meetings, or excuse me, that virtual legislative breakfast then led to some individual Zoom meetings where we were able to really kind of foster better relationships and get some of these folks on board to champion the next step of looking at a task force to help implement this plan, and also to help address some of the disparities that we had been talking about and the funding allocations from the state. So with that, the last piece I'll say is, if we can look at that declaration of support, we really wanted to highlight what that said in that half page that was featured in the papers, was that we were calling on elected leaders. We had 60 plus organizations that were sharing in this call of elected leaders to support us in making sure that our young children had a high quality pre-K opportunity. And that task force is going to be instrumental to the next steps that we do. And I just want to thank all 60 of those folks, and some of you guys are represented today, hopefully in this call. But we had everybody from local nonprofits to advocacy groups, education related entities, higher education, childcare providers, business and faith related groups, and they all made a huge difference. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Bob. He's going to talk a little bit more about this task force. Thank you.
Just last week, we did have a kind of reached a turning point in which the county commissioners approved a resolution establishing the Community Early Childhood Education Task Force. So this group, which needs to be constituted and need to identify who the members will be, only knowing that they're going to be drawn from across the community, various sectors, various kinds of organizations, individuals, parents, to be able to serve on this task force that is charged with developing a plan to provide for all children in Forsyth County to have access to pre-K. That's a long-range plan, but we'll be looking at some short-term plans as well to get us along the way. And so listed here are some of the things that the task force will be focusing on. making sure that we respect parent choice, that we have a mixed system as we do now of public and private providers of pre-K programs, a very strong emphasis on parent participation and hearing from pre-K providers in terms of what the pre-K system of the future needs to look like. The task force will look into funding to see what's available, both from public sources at the local, state, and federal level, as well as private programs. We need to have a task force that can really look at how we can efficiently and effectively manage an expanded system. What would that take? How would that be done? Through what kind of entity? That'll be a part of their recommendations. Also central to their work will be to focus on the pre-K workforce, because we know that's at the heart of the pre-K program, that we need qualified faculty, teachers, and staff to be able to provide a high quality pre-K program. So real emphasis on how to recruit and retain that staff, develop their skills, and compensate them fairly. One of the concerns that has come up in this process is to make sure that any pre-K expansion doesn't have an adverse effect on the overall childcare birth to 5 system. Finally, the task force will be looking at establishing a timeline extending probably over several years, leading to the achievement of a universal pre-K system in Forsyth County. Again, as I mentioned, the membership will represent the various stakeholder groups to really make sure that we have broad input and support for pre-K in Forsyth County. And as stated in our resolution, the plan would be developed and delivered to our elected officials and other sectors of the community by the end of February next year, about a year from now. So that's what we're looking at with the development of the Childcare Early Childhood Education Task Force. I think it really is a major turning point in our efforts, but there are some other turning points too that are happening simultaneously with this that really will come into play to make sure that whatever plan is developed has a lot of parent and community input. So I want to kind of turn over the next presentation to a couple folks who they and their organizations are involved in making sure that we have a lot of input from parents and the community at the grassroots level. So first, I want to introduce Kelly Easton, who is the Executive Director of Action for Equity. And Kelly is going to share kind of what her organization is going to be involved with in making it possible for parents and folks at the community level to participate in the development of our pre-K system. Kelly?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Kelly Easton, and I'm the Executive Director for Action for Equity. Next. So just to give a little background about Action for Equity, we are a public policy advocacy organization, a grassroots organization. We are an intentionally Black-led and multiracial coalition. And we grew from a campaign that started in the Black community over some conditions at Ashley Elementary School. The name of that campaign was Action for Ashley. And there was bad air quality in the school, in that school, and the district was very slow in responding. And that is a contrast compared to similar situations that had happened at a predominantly white school. And so we did file a Title VII complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, and they found that there could have been racial discrimination, and so an investigation opened up. But what we realized was that that was just a symptom to a greater equity issue. And from there, we launched Action for Equity, and we crafted a policy agenda that focuses on achieving equity in education, closing the achievement gap, establishing safe and healthy school infrastructure. And as a result of COVID, then we really began centering all of our positions as well as our policies around centering the whole child through the whole school, whole community, and whole child policy. Most notable, some of the things that we've achieved that we're proud of was just our mobilization effort in order to be able to elect an equity-minded school board. We also fought for the equity policy, hiring an equity director, as well as expanding the Office of Equity, establishing an equity committee, and working towards mandating the infusion curriculum. And so we know that historically decisions have been made in order to limit, isolate, and prevent Black and low-income children from access and opportunity. And that is exactly why Action for Equity is honored to be able to join the fight with the pre-K priority in order to achieve pre-K for all students. We know that in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, that we have one of the lowest economic mobility rates in the entire country. And in order to begin to produce better outcomes, then we need to begin early. We need to start early in order to change those conditions. And as we move towards changing those outcomes, we believe that all decision making, however, must be rooted in social justice. So we must move from what we consider to be the first equity work, first generation equity work that really, in some ways, we feel have become somewhat of a buzzword, and move towards a more action-oriented approach. And so we believe that these four things are essential in order to achieve better outcomes that are just. First, it will require a unique commitment and determination. We must also let go of the traditional Band-Aid approaches that have failed us in the past. We also must push through some discomfort and understand the structural barriers and root causes, as well as our own roles as community members, as agencies and stakeholders in perpetuating these disparities. And we also must have a very keen understanding of how our systems were set up and how they have morphed over time. Up next. And as we move towards achieving social justice in our fight for achieving pre-K for all students, then we must understand that we have to start while that child is in the womb. And then we also must remove barriers to access. But it's not enough to just have that as an objective. We must also place metrics in place to show how we are, in fact, removing barriers to access. And one very important key is we must work towards informing, educating, and giving agency to the child's family that will produce self-determination. Next. And so with Actions for Equity, we are focusing on systems change solutions. And we believe that the whole child policy is in fact one of those solutions. And what we've been working on is creating a platform or a think tank, a think and do tank called Forsyth Family Power. And so in terms of the thinking, we want to give parents and family members agency. And so we're crafting a visionary panel that will work towards providing culturally relevant solutions that are fitting to their lifestyles and that are adapted to their needs. We also understand that to achieve meaningful school change and a healthy school climate, that cultivation must begin with the leadership in the school. But we believe that principals are important, not only in the schools and in the classrooms in terms of providing leadership, but we also must work to center the principal's leadership within the community as well. And then lastly, we must work with community stakeholders within this think tank in order for those organizations and stakeholders, community leaders, to provide data as well as infrastructure towards operationalize the plans and goals. Next. And so here is, this pretty much is a framework or the organizational structure that we're working on. And what you'll have is at the very top, we'll have co-chairs, and these co-chairs will be elected by a visionary board. The visionary board will consist of 3 caucuses, a pre-K priority caucus, and then also a Hispanic Latinx caucus, as well as the Black caucus. And everyone that is participating on this in one of the caucuses are all going to be parents and family members of students in the school district. And then Action for Equity will provide a facilitation, because it's not important to just have a safe place for conversation, which is what we are seeking to create. But then we also want to make sure that we are producing advocates. And so that will be able to lead to greater leadership, parental leadership and advocacy that is necessary to achieve the change. And then what you'll find underneath that is the whole child ecosystem. And so we're proud to work with Forsyth Promise, who will actually be the facilitator of the whole child ecosystem. And as such, then Forsyth Promise will do the facilitation between the community, which will be the strategy panel for the whole community. And that strategy panel will consist of all the community partners. And then on the other side of that, what you'll find is the whole school. And that's where we'll have the ability to center principal leadership. As we launch this Think and Do tank, we are focusing on the Inspired 340 schools, which the Inspired 340 schools are the schools in our district that have been acknowledged, that have been recognized for their need to provide wraparound services. And then what you'll find if you in the center between the Inspired 340 schools and the community partners is strong community engagement. And we do know that the school district has been making moves towards strengthening community engagement, which we are hopeful to have that department and the director as a partner. Next. And so so in terms of the strategy panel, I'm just going to go down to the commitment for culture change, just in lieu of time. I just want to point out the three main things that we're very excited when it comes to looking at the way we structure this work. The first thing is that we are asking for a shared understanding of education equity and justice. And so we've had some conversations with some potential stakeholders and have ran the idea of them going through REI training before participating on the panel. So again, they can understand just the structural, the structural, what we consider to be a structural violence of the system and how that has worked over time. And so therefore we can ensure that the decisions are being made from a place of accountability, as well as just really, again, that keen understanding. And then Action for Equity, we have some facilitators who will also provide a social justice and equity and education training, which specifically relates to the history and the data and the climate and just environmental scan of Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. And then we're also asking for all members, whether it's a parent or family member or an agency or a community stakeholder, to take part in restorative practices. Again, we know that we have to have these tough conversations, and there's a lot that we must grapple with, but the end goal is to be able to do something new. And then lastly, we're asking for the strategy panel to be able to show their commitment by following the direction of the visionary board in collaboration with the principal leadership. And so collectively, we can ensure that those who are most impacted are truly driving the outcome. And so that is pretty much it for Action for Equity. Again, we're very excited to be a part of this coalition and what I call carrying our load towards achieving the goal. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. It's great to have Action for Equity as a partner in this work to make sure that we do have the input from the community, especially from the parents and families that are most going to be affected by and benefit from expanding high quality pre-K. Another grassroots partner that is coming on to help us to hear the voice of community, the voice of parents, is Latino Community Services. And I'm glad that Odette Sanchez is with us today to share a bit about how she sees Latino Community Services participating in moving our community forward to expand high quality pre-K. Odette?
Hi, everyone. My name is Odette Sanchez. I'm Executive Director for Latino Community Services, which is a grassroots organization located in the Old Town area. We partner with Hispanic Latino families to be able to help them achieve their educational and economic potential to the fullest in hope of a safe and a better future for the families. And the way that we're coming together, and we are so grateful for this partnership with Action for Equity, with the Pre-K Priority, with Smart Start also as well, and all the community partners that are working and collaborating to bring the Pre-K initiative, Pre-K Priority initiative forward and be able to make it a permanent, basically, something that we will continue to do for many, many years to go. And so what we're wanting to do basically is to continue to have family engagements, bring the families, bring more awareness in our communities of the needs of the Pre-K Priority. We are partnering with Action for Equity to be able to become sisters organizations basically, and promoting the information that needs to be shared in our communities and be able to get more community involvement, express the importance of early childhood in our communities and be able to get more children into the classrooms for our preschool and pre-K programs that we're offering through our Pre-K Priority, but it is an honor and a privilege to be able to be working with all the wonderful community partners in this initiative. And I appreciate Bob and Leslie and Cape Reynolds Charitable Trust also for funding this awesome opportunity and for allowing us to be part of this initiative.
Thank you, Odette. I'm glad you mentioned the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust because we do owe a great thanks to them for their support of this initiative. They have been supporters of the work of the Pre-K Priority itself over the last 3 years, and we had a grant renewed for another 2 years to provide the staff support and structure for the Pre-K Priority. And of course, grants have also been awarded to Action for Equity and Latino Community Services to proceed with the grassroots work. So very thankful to the support of KP Reynolds Charitable Trust. I'm going to move quickly here from the local level where we've heard from kind of what we've done in our campaign. We heard from Kelly and Odette about what they're going to be doing here in Forsyth County. Because one of the things that we discovered in this journey over the last several months is how important what's happening at the state level is, because that's where most of the funds come from for pre-K, funds for our childcare providers through the Subsidy program. And we've learned a lot. And when I say we, the next person who's going to speak is a part of that we, Louis Finney, Executive Director, CEO at Smart Start of Forsyth County. And we've learned a lot about the North Carolina Pre-K program, which many of our organizations draw into, depend upon in providing pre-K programs in the community. But what we've learned is that we've got a ways to go to really make that a much more equitable and stronger supporter of pre-K, especially here in Forsyth County. So I want to turn it over to Louis to share some of the things that kind of are on our agenda in terms of making that NC Pre-K program a much better supporter of our efforts here in Forsyth County. Louis?
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Louis Finney. I'm the CEO of Smart Start of Forsyth County. One of our primary responsibilities is support some convening on early childhood, but also to support the North Carolina Pre-K program. And to Bob's point earlier, some of our biggest challenges is looking at some of the differences as it relates to equity in Forsyth County. And just some examples I'm going to talk to you about. For example, the allocation of the North Carolina Pre-K program in counties across the state is disproportionate. Pretty much 27% of our 2,700 eligible children in Forsyth County are enrolled in programs that are funded by NC Pre-K. But when you compare that to the entire state of North Carolina, the average is 47%. If you want to look over to Gulfport County, it's 67% enrolled. And then 75% in nearly half the counties in North Carolina. Now, the challenge that we have with that in Forsyth County is that this is a state program where we all pay the same amount of state taxes for this particular service. And what we've been trying to find out is why Forsyth County is still at 27%. And from doing some of our research since we've been here, we actually found out that there really is no set formula or methodology for allocating NC pre-K slots to county. It seems to be more that you tell us what we need and then we give it to you. There's also no consistent guidelines to calculate the number of children on the wait list. Because not only do we have eligible children, but we also have a wait list. And what we're finding now is that there still seems to be a need for NC pre-K programs. The other thing that we observed through this process is that the NC pre-K program rate of reimbursement only partially covers the cost of a high quality program. For example, that rate covers about 65% of the cost of a slot in a community child care center, 47% in our school district. And as you all know, we have a Head Start program, and it's about 30 to 40% of the cost of a slot in the Head Start program. So there still is a need for additional funds to even fully fund one particular child in the program. Also, the quality standards of the NC pre-K program have declined over the past 2 years, primarily meeting only 8 of the 10 standards established by the National Institute of Early Education Research. And this program does not meet the standards for staff professional development and the requirement that assistant teachers who have a CDA certification, those who work in education. The other thing that we've been looking at as well is the market rate for child care subsidy. Those who are familiar with the Child Care Subsidy program, it's a very good federal program to state to local, but the formula for calculating the market rate for child care subsidy has produced grossly disproportionate rates in counties across the state. For example, in our county, Forsyth County, the market rate for 3 and 4-year-olds in a 5-star quality is $790 per child per month. It's only 2/3 of the $1,194 rate in Gulfport County. That's a significant difference when it relates to our families, and particularly when we're trying to pay our teachers a living wage. Some of the other challenges that we saw that I want to talk about briefly is an extremely disparate market rate that placed the child care industry in certain counties at a severe competitive disadvantage. For example, a 5-star child care center in Kernersville with a classroom of 18 4-year-olds that are receiving the child care subsidy will receive $80,000, 264 less annually than a similar classroom just 5 miles away in Colfax City, which is in Gulfport County. The market rate for child care subsidy for a 4-year-old in a 5-star child care center in Forsyth County is $790. It's higher than the NC pre-K rate for a community slot of $650. Other things that we saw through this observation is a proposal to establish a statewide floor for the market rate would raise Forsyth County's rate to $1,049 for 4-year-olds in a 5-star facility. And this will help generate $55,944 in additional income annually for a classroom with 18 children. Because this is not just about a course, it's first about supporting our children and making sure they have a high quality center. But one thing we have to also understand is that in our particular community, 99.8% of the people working in child care are women. Majority of them are women of color, but also they are all below a living wage, yet we're requiring them to have certain credentials to do this job. So it's also an aging out market as well. So as we try to establish and get new people to enter to this field, it's kind of hard to get a teacher to come into a program knowing that they can only make potentially $10 to $13 an hour, given such an important job in working with NC pre-K kids. Now I just want to close with y'all and let you all know that the method for calculating the market rate can be changed by administrative action. The current formula sets the rate at 75% of the highest cost for child care charged by a provider in a given county. This sets in motion a race to the bottom by which charging relatively low rates results in receiving lower rates, which result in even a lower income for providers. And that gets to my point earlier, that this is also about income equality for our providers as well, as they're making some money so they can provide services for our children. And that completes my presentation, unless there's any kind of questions, but I just really encourage you all to really look at some of the data that we have and also support the pre-K priority, because it's important to all of us in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Appreciate that overview of a lot of these issues, and there are many. I mean, it's pretty remarkable as we've gone along in this process just to discover how much change needs to occur, I think, both in the NC pre-K program and in the market rate calculation. You know, some of this has been known for a while, some of it is new, but as we proceed with forming the Early Childhood Education Task Force, this is something that's going to be on their agenda too, when it comes to how is it that we can really support a vibrant, high quality pre-K program in our county. And again, this isn't something the pre-K priority can accomplish alone. We have additional partners now with Action for Equity and Latino Community Services, but this needs to be a major effort in order to really make for more equitable funding of pre-K and child care programs in Forsyth County. And fortunately, there are a number of organizations that are coming to the fore to be able to push for changes in how these state programs are operated and how funding happens. And I think it's important for us to know that, you know, we do have a lot of comrades in arms, so to speak, if I can use that term, who are ready really to bring about some change at the state level. And I want to turn it back over to Leslie to just kind of give everyone a picture of who some of our partners are as we really work to make changes in the state funding system. Leslie?
Thanks, Bob. And so if we can have the slide up that talks about our partners in the work, that's going to help us kind of a quick list of some of these folks that we're working with. The Forsyth County Early Childhood Education Task Force, of course, is the first one on the list. And you've heard about that from Bob about how instrumental that will be to actualizing the plan to elevate high quality pre-K and offer it to more children. And the pre-K priority will continue to be a service to that and a support to that task force. The Pre-K Priority Advocacy Work Group is a group of individuals that will be kind of separately working to connect and network with local and state level organizations to be sure we're following the latest news, the partnering and supporting them both at the local and state levels. Then we get to the Forsyth County Pre-K Committee, and that's the NC Pre-K Committee that's been really part and parcel of this initiative since the beginning. We've had people at the table at the NC Pre-K Committee meetings, and they've also been at the Pre-K Priority meetings. So we're working in tandem to make sure we're maximizing what we can do for young children. The formation of a statewide study group is a new development. You can see those names listed on the slide and their respective positions. And a little background there is it's quite interesting. In the fall of 2020, after we started engaging some of our elected local leaders about the disparity in funding with the NC Pre-K program along with the market rate, Don Martin, County Commissioner, got involved and wanted to meet with Representative Donnie Lambeth, local businessman Don Flo, County Manager Dudley Watts, and Speaker of the House Tim Moore to talk about that disparity in funding and try to engage them to see what was happening. That led to a plan to form a statewide study group. And fortunately, at the end of February, this last month, Louis and Bob, Don Martin, Donnie Lambeth's research assistant, they all met virtually with the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, and then also the new director of the Division of Child Development and Early Education. So those are pretty high level folks in the state that are working across the pre-K allocation. And so that was a very great opportunity to get in front of them and talk about the things that we had found in the research on the allocations. And they agreed that they were problems and the issues that needed to be dealt with. And so they have vowed to address them, and we're going to hold them to that and continue to follow up with them on that. The next one is the statewide Early Childhood Financing and Learning Group. It's convened by the North Carolina Justice Center. It includes probably 8 to 12 different counties that are all working towards similar initiatives that we are with the pre-K priority, really being kind of a universal pre-K landscape and wanting to promote high quality pre-K in their counties. So we meet quarterly, and we meet virtually, of course, now, and we share information on strategy, learning, and different financing options that people are exploring across the state. So that's been very helpful. And then the NC Partnership for Children's Legislative Committee. So it's a mouthful. And if you're not familiar, the North Carolina Partnership for Children is often referred to as NCPC. And it's the state level nonprofit organization that oversees all the Smart Start organizations here in North Carolina. And Louis Finney, who you met earlier, is one of 7 executive directors that is part of a legislative committee that is working at the state level to engage lawmakers to support North Carolina pre-K program funding. So he's working on our behalf there as well. And then we have the North Carolina Early Education Foundation. I'm sure several of you that are probably on this phone call are very well, I guess you probably know of them and you've used their resources like we have. They're based in Raleigh. They're a nonprofit that works to promote understanding and advance policies for children in North Carolina so that they are, by the time they finish 3rd grade, they are on the track to success. And they produce a lot of materials on state policy that help keep us informed about what's going on with activities related to early learning. So they've been a great resource for us. And then lastly, we have the Forsyth County Legislative Delegation. And you can see there some high-ranking folks if you're talking about politics, you've got Senator Kravick, you've got Senator Lowe, and then Representative Lambeth, who are all involved on the appropriations committees for health and human services and are at that point, they are really instrumental in funding allocations for not only the North Carolina pre-K program, but also the Childcare subsidy. So we're hoping to persuade them to give a closer look to these current disparities that we've already engaged some of the other local leaders on and help them to understand why it's important to ensure that Forsyth County is getting its fair share for these early education programs. So again, that's something that's in the works, but we're looking forward to partnering with these folks locally and getting it at the state level to be something that's really an issue that people don't overlook any further and are definitely looking for outcomes that reflect what we need here locally. So I'll turn it back over to Bob for the next portion.
You're on mute, Bob.
Okay, thank you. There is a lot going on, and it's rather remarkable, even at a time when we're all dealing with the limitations of living through a pandemic, that change is in the wind. And what we need to do as a pre-K priority is to really pull our resources together and focus our work on what we can do to move things at both the local and the state level. So I just wanted to spend a couple minutes just talking about the structure of the pre-K priority at this point. It's really nothing new. Those of you who have been involved over the years know that we work by having a steering committee and work groups that really do the work that's needed to move the initiative forward. And so at this point, we continue to have a steering committee composed of, I think, close to 15 members from various early education organizations and funders and supporters. We're also looking to add some parent representatives on the committee. And that committee really is going to support the work of the early education, childhood education task force in the development of the pre-K plan. But as I said, the real work that goes on is in the work groups. These work groups have kind of been on a hiatus during the campaign that we had this past fall, but they are going to be reassembling in the weeks ahead and really be working through this coming year to provide the kind of information that the task force is going to need to come up with a viable plan. So there's listed the 4 work groups that will be resuming meeting, really focusing on quality, which is of course the cornerstone of pre-K work, and how we evaluate outcomes. This is going to be very important to really have kind of fleshed out if we're going to develop a viable plan. Workforce education and development, we've had a strong committee that's worked on the recruitment, retention, training, and compensation of our early child care workforce, making sure that that is supported, and especially with the focus on what we do about compensation levels. Again, as Lewis indicated, a lot of what can be done there is going to be depending on the kind of support that we can get from the state. So these issues are all interrelated, which is why just to the bottom, we will be forming an advocacy committee to really work to make those changes at the state level that's going to provide additional funding here in Forsyth County, working as a group, but also in partnership with the organizations and individuals that Leslie mentioned. And then finally, a work group that we've had in the past that needs again to get reconvened is around system implementation and administration. How are we going to be able to manage and organize an expanded pre-K system that has so many partners, some public, some private, Head Start? How do we all come together and get organized in an efficient and effective way to use the funds that would be coming into the community wisely? So that's the structure. Those of you, again, participating in this webinar here today, I invite you to take a look and consider if you might want to be a part of any of those work groups. Some of you I know have in the past, and we really need to get organized again, because it's going to be taken to a different level. Now that we're really into some serious planning, there are going to be a lot of questions that come up in the process that we maybe didn't have to answer at all or as fully as we before. So now is the time for us to really, bring some focus to these areas so that we can provide the task force with the knowledge and information, research, and recommendations that they'll need to develop a plan. And I would just conclude with the last slide here, which is a way to kind of graphically present what we're talking about in terms of structure. And again, this is kind of in the formative period right now, but within the next 4 to 6 weeks, we hope to have all of these groups in operation. With the pre-K priority, you can see the various work groups that I just mentioned that will be doing the work, channeling it to the steering committee so that the steering committee can inform the early childhood education task force as it develops its pre-K plan. We're also working certainly with Kelly and Odette and others about how we can develop a group that here is called a Parent Accountability Council. We borrowed that word, that term from the work that's being done out in Portland, Oregon, in which they have a group established, led and run by parents that really has the capacity, the ability to review all of the different plans and recommendations that would go into the planning process with the task force to make sure that the preferences and priorities of parents are heard, respected, and incorporated into the plan. We would want that group also to work very closely with our advocacy work group with the pre-K priority, because the voices of parents and community members are going to be critical as we work to not only improve our policies and practices and funding here at the local level but to make sure that our voice is heard in Raleigh to really make some of the changes that need to be made at the state level. And again, can't underestimate that that's where the funding is going to come from, and we need to be very active with all of our partners to make sure that Forsyth County is able to get an equitable share of the funding that comes from the state. So that concludes our presentation. We still do have some time left, about a few minutes or so, in case there are any questions that I guess folks could just put in the chat box. Is that, I think, the best way to to get a question put to any of us here on the panel about anything you've heard, about the direction we're headed in, or the role that you might play in moving this initiative forward.
I was looking at the, just in case we're waiting while anybody has a question, I was looking at the attendees, and it's great to see all of you. We're glad you're here. And a lot of you have already been involved with this, and you are part of the list of the invitees that were stakeholders. So we're glad that you've shown back up. So this may be, some of this information you already know because you've been tuning in on our webinars and some of following the reports and some of the other things that we've been sending out over the last couple of months. But if there's any questions too about the things going forward with the task force or the work groups that we'll be forming, we invite you to ask questions about that. If it's not today, you can follow up with me or Bob or anyone on this call about next steps for some of the work that will be done if you're wanting to get back involved.
So again, there's a lot of information available here. We'll kind of follow up and send out the PowerPoint that we used today to everyone that participated. And along with that, really inviting your participation. Again, this is, I think this is a year that can really be a turning point for the efforts that we've been making to advance high quality pre-K in Forsyth County. In many ways, it feels like we've been moving uphill for quite a while with all the work that many of you have contributed to. You know, that work is available for the use of our task force. All of the reports and studies, the feasibility study that Forsyth Futures did last year, which we do plan to update. We'll be looking at getting more current information, really to see what the impact of COVID has been on pre-K, on childcare providers in our community, because that's going to be critical when it comes to knowing what it is that we have to build on as we expand a pre-K system. So I think the stage is set. We have our elected officials on board and supporting this initiative. Earlier this morning, I was attended the Government Affairs Committee meeting of Greater Winston-Salem, Inc., formerly known as the Winston-Salem Chamber of Commerce. And one of the items on the committee agenda that was featured was pre-K. And the Chamber of Commerce is solidly behind expanding high quality pre-K in the county. They recognize that it is critical for not only parents and children, but for employers and for our economy to have a high quality system, both of pre-K and childcare in Forsyth County. And I think everybody is kind of recognizing that, you know, for whatever reasons, we kind of haven't been able to make some of the headway that I think has happened in other counties. And as well as with the funding that's been available. So I think that our community at this point is really all, I think, kind of beginning to start to work in tandem to move us forward. And that's what we need. We just need a cross-sector approach to accomplishing the goals that we've set out for ourselves. But beneath all of that is a lot of the just day in and day out work that we need to do as a pre-K priority to really get those work groups going and also to support and benefit from the work that our partners at the Latino Community Services and Action for Equity are going to be doing. So again, if there aren't any other questions, I would just kind of close by thanking everyone for participating. You'll be receiving this information and again, a renewed invitation to participate in our efforts to really bring high quality pre-K to Forsyth County.
Bob, the only other last thing I'll add is there was a question if this webinar would be recorded and able for others to view later, and we are recording it. It will be on the website under resources and materials, so definitely feel free to share it with others. And we will be offering this session again. The same information will be shared tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. So Wednesday at 5, if you want to forward your invitation that you received to someone, we'd love for you to do that. So thank you for joining us. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.